Howdy, everybody. Shasta College Humanities 4 Film Studies. How was your weekend? It is Monday, the last day of February. See, most of you got your essays in. More fun and games to come, more movies to watch. We're just getting started. Very much like spring today. I actually hear frogs out back of my house. I'm going to talk a few things today. Um, Cinema's changing. But there had always been an underground cinema, even early cinema in the 30s and 40s. And it was made by black filmmakers, starring black actors, written by black writers. And they were specifically made for a black audience in urban areas like Detroit, Pittsburgh, Chicago, New York. They weren't mainstream Hollywood, folks. This is Black History Month, so I wanted to touch on a little of this because really black cinema doesn't really take hold until the 1970s. Maybe you've heard about that era, which I'm going to get to, but no, we're not there yet. Um, Black cinema is having a renaissance period right now. I'll be talking about that in the future. But and how important these early filmmakers were to the whole process of getting the stories out about Black lives, Black stories in America. In most films like Gone with the Wind and other Hollywood films with white actors, uh, African Americans were usually given the parts of maids and butlers, comedic parts. Very few serious parts out there, folks. There were some, but very few. And there were a lot of it was there to kind of serve the white masters in the film, and that's just how it was. So there was an audience out there, and some African American filmmakers decided to try to make, and they did made a lot of these films. Most of them have disappeared over the years. The reason why they've disappeared is because how they used to store cinema films. Celluloid is a film product. It's called celluloid, folks. It's a film strip, and it if it's not stored properly in a proper temperature, it will just disintegrate. And so hundreds of these films weren't stored properly, or they were stored somewhere and they were taking up shelf space and they were destroyed to make room for new films. That's the tragedy of about 80% of the silent films in this country. Uh, there was hundreds of silent films being made. Very few survive to this day because they destroyed them to make shelf room. They had no idea that they're destroying a huge part of our humanities and our history. Hopefully, we've learned from it. Now, how long does a new film last on a hard drive? We don't know. I've made films on celluloid, on videotape, on mini DV tape, they call it, cassette tape. Nobody really knows how long they last because they haven't been around that long before they start disintegrating. So hopefully, when they're up there, starting in the cloud, it's there forever. But they probably have a shelf life. We'll see what it is. In the meantime, Black History Month. Um, we're all standing on the shoulders of these black filmmakers. They had a story to tell. They got their story out there. They had an audience. They made some money. And go check. I put a brief documentary there. There's not much information out there on YouTube um, about this era. Took place in the 30s and the 40s. I know we're past that now, but I wanted to give you guys a sample of some of these films that were made and where the black characters were treated like everybody else, like they had the same issues everybody else did. They made black westerns. black war films, black whatever they had the money for, which was not a lot of money. Um, but they did the best they could, and some people came out of it who transcended and went into white films, mostly actors, and they had pretty successful careers and straight Hollywood white films, but that was few and far in between. So these stories needed to be told, and they're told in a very humanistic way, uh, where if a white audience watched it, they would say, "Oh, there is no difference between us white people and that's those people. Besides our skin tone, we're all dealing with the same heartache, the same dreams, the same hopes for a better life in this world we're living in. Oh, we're all the same. They're just like us. They. Let's get rid of that word they. I'm sick of it. Anyway, so check that little documentary out, and maybe we'll have a little discussion this week on do you watch movies, black films, any films? I don't care. Probably the newer stuff like Get Out by Peel, who I think is a brilliant um, filmmaker and storyteller. 12 Years a Slave. There's a lot of stuff that's been released recently. Um, Tell me what you think about it. I'll start a discussion. I'll post that. I'm just now thought of that. Aren't you glad I think about these things? Discuss. Okay. Maybe Spike Lee's your thing. Maybe you don't even know who Spike Lee is. He was started in the independent scene in the 80s. Was She's Got to Have It, and has progressed and made some controversial films. Um, Maybe you hate his stuff. Maybe you love it. Spike Lee, there's no doubting his audacity and his brilliance. What do you think? Anyway, give me a shout out in the discussions. I'll post it. You'll see it. So, anyway, the other genre or category of film I want to discuss tonight, we're in the post World War II era. I've talked about Italian neorealism right after the World War II. And then a little bit after that, the great realistic films that have helped bring Britain out of the war in Great Britain. Maybe you saw that documentary. I showed some previews for you guys to look at. Um, the Third Man, Red Shoes. So Britain was coming out of the war. They'd been bombed in the war. They didn't have a lot of time or money to make films in the war, although they did. And then we go across the ocean, and we have Japanese filmmakers. I hope you looked at those documentaries. Hope you got something out of it. Please keep in mind that all or any of this could be on a test at any moment. So do take note of it. Do watch it. Catalog it away on your notes on your iPhone because it may be used in a test. So, a genre of film popped up called film noir. It's one of my favorite genres of all time. Um, it's a very powerful genre um, made by filmmakers who were coming out of the war and could not tell the same happy stories or the silly comedies or the happy musicals. They had to tell more realistic stories based on, like the Italian neorealism. And noir means dark cinema, dark film. That's essentially it translates to black film. It's a French term, and that's metaphorically speaking, meaning the subject matter were dark. These weren't happy-go-lucky films with cute characters. Lots of flawed characters in film noir. That's why I love it. Um, Lots of tragic characters in film noir, human characters, telling a humanistic story that we had never seen before. And it was a very popular genre until it fell out of favor in the late 50s when people kind of stopped making those kind of films. And we went into the big epic cinema, religious cinema like Ben Hur, Greatest Story Ever Told, color cinema. And that was to try to combat the popularity of television. But television wasn't totally in everybody's house during these film noir era. Television essentially came out in 1948 and wasn't until the mid 50s where people stayed home in the millions from cinema. I'll be talking about that next later on this week. Um, about how Hollywood lost their grasp on the audience because television siphoned it off, and you could stay at home and watch television for free because by the mid 1950s, everybody had black and white television. But in late 40s, early 50s, when these noir films were being made, they did not. People were still having to go to the movie. And so I'll post a little documentary on film noir. Um, that's gives you a good thumbnail sketch. Um, After World War II, the stories took a dark turn. We had gone through a world war, folks. Our men and women of that generation, our filmmakers, had seen stuff, disturbing stuff. They saw a lot of destruction and death. And then they saw a lot of humanity and they saw a lot of inhumanity. And so their films were mirroring that. Remember, I'm always going to be mentioning how is the culture mirrored in the films of the day and how do the films mirror the culture? It goes back and forth. Without the culture taking a dark turn, these films wouldn't have had an audience, but they had an audience because the audience was ready for these darker stories. A lot of them were usually, a lot of them, not all of them, of course, but they required, usually there would be a male, lead male, it's always men for the most part. He could be a flawed character, not necessarily a good guy, but he's not the worst guy in the movie. And so that means he's the hero. And he could be a private detective, which is really common. Uh, and he works at night. These films mostly all take place at night. And the whole point of it is what goes on at night when humans are safely in their bed. There's a whole other human endeavor going on at night. What is it? Well, a lot of it's crime. These covers, these films covered that area. Very few of these films are in the daylight. There were some. Well, all these films, for the most part, in black and white. I know you love black and white by now, and they're filmed very darkly because they didn't have much money. Meaning, there's not a lot of light coming in the room, and so they filmed with a lot of shadows. What goes on in the shadows? The mystery of what's going on at night in the shadows when you're home sleeping safely in your bed with your cat next to you. Some dark stuff is happening at night in our communities. And these films were depicting that. There's usually the woman in the movie would usually be a seductress who is going to seduce the men, the male lead, in doing something for her that's usually some bad stuff, committing murder, trying to get rid of her ex-husband to try to collect the insurance. And the man is hopeless to say no because of her sexual charms. She's known as a femme fatale. Maybe you know the Velvet Underground song. Do you? We're going to talk about the Velvet Underground. He wrote a great song, Lou Reed. She was a femme fatale, which is another French term for fatal, the fatal woman. Fatal why? Well, like a black widow spider, they seduce the male black widow. After they've had sex, she bites their heads off. No longer needed. The femme fatale was the same thing. The man is drawn to this powerful person who uses their sexual powers like we've never seen before. This is post World War II. Women had gone through a lot. They're now just as possibly evil as their male counterparts. Think of that. It's even, they're no longer staying at home taking care of the kids. They're trying to avoid that. They don't want that lifestyle. And so, like a movie like The Postman Rings Twice, she seduces a hapless male into murdering her husband, or Double Indemnity, same story. And nothing's good is going to happen from this. She's called the fatal film female for a reason. People are going to die because of her. And Postman Rings Twice, he goes to the gas chamber, Double Indemnity. He goes to the gas chamber, but also he kills the femme fatale. So it doesn't end well for the femme fatale. Nobody gets away with this evil stuff in these movies. They have to be punished for their sins, and they are always. Out of the past, the great Jane Greer was one of the greatest femme fatales ever. One of the greatest female characters ever, because she's just as strong and smart and sexual as the males. And the males cannot resist her until it's too late. These films usually dealt with desperate people in desperate times, trying to find their place in the world after we'd gone through a world war. They're out at night, they're in nightclubs, they're drinking too much liquor, smoking too many cigarettes, and they're not seeing anything that looks good in the world or what they can relate to in the world when the lights are on and daytime, when all the happy people are out. They don't understand why they're not fitting in. Every art movement in the world comes out of that desperate night feeling. Where do you think punk rock comes from? People are happy walking around in the daytime? No. So we had powerful filmmaking, we had powerful directors, male for the most part, although some film, Ida Lupino, a revolutionary female director who was an actress in some of these um, film noirs like High Sarah, broached out and became a director and made some very powerful films in the film noir genre. When we get to female directors in a little bit, you'll be looking at some film clips of hers. She worked in the 40s and 50s and then became a television director in the 60s. Anyway, so it's a powerful story to be told, the film noir. People that are drawn to the dark side of the human nature are drawn to film noir. People who don't trust, people who are suspicious, skeptical, cynical, they're looking for something else in the world that is it's not given to them. That's why these films were so powerful. Changed everything. Looking at my notes. That's it. I'm not going to talk any longer. I want to keep these things relatively short. Hope you guys are getting something out of this class. Look at these films in a deep way. I mean, how fun. You get to watch films and get to write about them. And hopefully, you've never seen these kind of films before, and it opens up a new frontier to you because that's what education's all about, something new. or we will just be watching your favorite TV shows. We could do that too later. Anyway, so this is Black History Month. Read up about it. Check out the Canvas videos I'm presenting. Look at the discussions. I'll talk to you later when the story film continues.